Hey everyone, Nathan here, Absurd Being. Alright, so we're back. It's been a little while since I've made one of these videos, but it's time to start another series. And this time I thought we would get into Maurice Merleau-Ponty's The Visible and the Invisible. I read this book quite a while ago, but at the time I was just getting into Bergson, I think. And I was starstruck by Bergson and his metaphysics. So I was really moving away from phenomenology and ontology. And I read it, made some notes on it, but didn't do anything with it. But I kind of always had it in the back of my mind that I would come back to this. And I'm glad actually that I did take a break and didn't try and rush through and do this video then, because I was kind of a little bit sick of phenomenology at that time. I was drawn more towards the metaphysical side of things, so I wouldn't have really enjoyed it as much as I am getting back into it now. So I'm glad I waited anyway. But this is the book we're going to look at in this series. So just before we get into the book itself, The Visible and the Invisible, Merleau-Ponty was working on it at the time of his death in 1961, so it's incomplete, which is a tremendous shame. As I'm reading through my notes and through parts of the book again now, it's so good. It is so good. He has such a penetrating insight. He has so many penetrating insights, I think, into the human condition and what things are and how we relate to them, and he's just the perfect guy to talk about this. So it really is a shame that he didn't get to finish it. And we have 160 pages, but like I say, he's only just scratching the surface at that. So this, I don't know how long it was going to be, but at least 500 pages, I would say. He's only just getting into it. There are 110 pages of working notes as well, which is interesting. Although, to be honest, I didn't find the working notes very helpful. That might just be a personal thing. I find it quite difficult to like take abstracted fragments and work with them. I like to have a completed whole that I can really get my teeth into. The fragments or the working notes, I can't really get into them because there's just no context. I don't know what Merleau-Ponty was thinking about at the time he wrote them. There's no background, it's just like there's these almost random ideas kind of thrown out, and for me, I just can't get anything out of them. I think I need that structure in order to get something from material like this. So I don't know, maybe you'll find them more interesting or helpful than I did, but they're there. And the idea of the book the idea behind the book seems to be that Merleau-Ponty's moving from phenomenology to ontology. So he's moving from grasping lived experiences, describing human life as it's lived, to understanding what it is that allows those experiences to be, how it is that those experiences can come about. So he's trying to ground those experiences in something, and that's being for him. That's being itself. So moving from phenomenology to ontology, and this is something that you will perhaps see. It was exactly what Heidegger was doing, right, with his project. The same. He starts off in Being and Time, description of Dasein, the phenomenology of Dasein, what it is to be a human being, how we live in the world, and an attempt then to move and ground that in being itself, which was a movement for Heidegger towards temporality, but that was a project he abandoned after Being and Time. And the arc is very similar for Merleau-Ponty. Phenomenology of perception, the phenomenal field, what lived experience is for human beings, to the transcendental field, where he tried to ground it in temporality again. Also, it seems like Heidegger, he abandons this, and the visible and the invisible is his attempt to go beyond that to understand being itself. So there's a real parallel between Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty. However, even though they're doing the same thing, and I think it's fair to say they are engaged in the same project, they understand being itself in very different ways. One key difference is that for Heidegger, he moves away from the phenomenon. He thinks you can't get to being itself from individual beings. Whereas for Merleau-Ponty, it's the exact opposite. He starts with the phenomenon. So that's the starting point for him. If there's no phenomenon, there's no being. So that's where, and that's what being itself is for Merleau-Ponty. It's the being of the phenomenon. And that's a crucial, I think, distinction between Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, even though they're essentially engaged in the same thing. They, like I said, they understand that thing in quite different ways. And talking about the being of the phenomenon, it's a nice segue to another book which was written, actually I'm not sure when it was written, but it was written by another Frenchman, Renaud Barbaras. And basically the being of the phenomenon is an attempt to finish the visible and the invisible. It's an attempt to understand Merleau-Ponty's thoughts, and it's pretty good. It's worth reading for sure. I really enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. It is kind of difficult, but it's good to read after you've read The Visible and the Invisible. It's not so useful as a kind of step-by-step commentary, but once you've read The Visible and the Invisible, if you then go on to the being of the phenomenon, I think you'll find it quite helpful. And okay, so that's phenomenology, ontology. And what we have here then in the visible and the invisible, essentially Merleau-Ponty's working through his thought by examining other philosophers' thoughts. So we get there's a lot of critique in the first 100 pages or so. So he's looking at people like Descartes, Kant, Husserl, Sartre, Bergson. Interestingly enough, there's no Heidegger. He doesn't seem to engage with Heidegger at all, which is interesting and strange considering their projects are so similar. So that's like the first 100 pages or 130 pages or something, and then then Merleau-Ponty really starts, I think, embarking on his own. It's like he's kind of cleared the way with some preliminaries, and then he starts with the chapter The Intertwining, and that is only like 30 pages or so, and so it's a real shame. You just get the feeling like he's just starting to build up some speed, and then it's done. But still, it's great. It's very interesting. It's good to see where Merleau-Ponty's thought was going after Phenomenology of Perception, and there's a lot to take away anyway from it. So with that said, let's start looking at the book itself. So the first part of the book the first chapter is reflection and interrogation, and the first subheading is the perceptual faith and its obscurity. And I'm going to break this subsection down into two parts. We'll do the first part today, and I've broken this video down into 3 sections, which just kind of emerge really naturally out of the first part of the subsection. So the first part of the video, to the things themselves. So to the things themselves, how Husserlian could you get to start off this book? Although, to be fair, Merleau-Ponty doesn't say that. This is my overlay. It's a nice way to frame these three sections, which you'll see once we get to the others. But anyway, to the things themselves. So in perception, we see the world and the things themselves. That's the idea. In other words, we don't see representations. We don't see the world and then interpret it and create some kind of representation, a model in our minds. If there's anything in phenomenology if there's anything valuable in phenomenology, and there is heaps valuable in it, but if there's anything of value particularly, it's this idea that we're not creating representations. We're not locked away in our minds, building a model of an external reality, which we're then separate from. The world we see is the world. There's no other world. We're not creating a model. We're not creating a copy. We're not representing anything. What we see in perception is the world and the things themselves. And there's a problem with this, though, that Merleau-Ponty notes: scepticism. So if I'm seeing the world itself, the world as it is, what about dreams? What about delirium? What about illusion? Then I'm not seeing the world as it is. So how can I be so confident that I am seeing the world as it is in perception? And the way that Merleau-Ponty deals with this is basically two arguments. The first is to say that skepticism of the world can't be extended to perception itself. So when we talk about skepticism, we say something like, if I'm dreaming, I think that this is the real world, but it isn't. I'm wrong. And Merleau-Ponty's point here is that you can only say that the dream world is false or an illusion in relation to something real, in relation to perception. So when we say the dream world is not real, we're referring that to perception, which therefore is what we take as fundamental reality. That's our starting point. The world as we grasp it in perception. So we can't avoid that. That's when we say the dream world is false, we are relating it to the true world of perception. It's not so much that it's not like a metaphysical claim here that the world we're seeing is real. It's just that when we say something is illusory or not real, the only thing we can mean by that is that it's not perception. It's not the world as we grasp it in normal perception. So skepticism itself doesn't extend to perception. And he also notes, secondly, that there is a difference in structure between the dream world and the world of perception. There is a difference of structure and, as it were, of grain between the perception or true vision, which gives rise to an open series of concordant explorations, and the dream, which is not observable and upon examination is almost nothing but blanks. So that's pretty fair, right? Dreams are fragmented, they're incomplete, as Merleau-Ponty says, they're almost nothing but blanks when we reflect on them. Life, the world as we grasp it through perception, isn't. It's anything but, right? The world that you live in is coherent, there's meaning, everything's connected, you have a history. It's ordered and complete in a way that dreams never are, and illusions and things grasped through hallucinations, for example. Those things are always fragmented, they're always There's just no cohesion to them. But you'll say, we don't know that when we're in the dream. When we're in the dream seems as real as anything else. And that's true. But the thing is that we don't think about it either. The only reason that dreams seem real is because we're not thinking critically. We're not thinking logically. And we are thinking logically when we're not dreaming, right? So if you've ever experienced lucid dreaming, I don't know, I have had a number of lucid dreams, and one thing that struck me about them is as soon as I realized I was dreaming, everything just took on this fake quality. Everything seemed almost two-dimensional in character. And the people that were there, their reactions were very stilted, and it was just like nothing like the real world. And I remember thinking that, talking to dream people, they're idiots. They are idiots. They don't know anything. And another thing too, one way to have a lucid dream is to ask yourself how you got where you are at the moment in the dream. Because in a dream, you never have a history. So if you ask yourself, how did I get here? And you think about it, and you can't answer it because you just suddenly appeared, then you know it's a dream, and that's when you're lucid. But in reality, right, if you ask yourself that question, well, you have a huge trail of experience behind you. You have a history, and all of that is missing in a dream. And that's the key point, that dreams are completely different from reality, from the world that we actually live in. And of course, you could still say, yeah, well, I mean, that's what you think. You think you're living in this world now, and you think you've got this history, but that could all be an illusion. Yeah, of course, that could all be an illusion. But again, an illusion in relation to what? The words no longer mean anything at this point. What is it an illusion in relation to, if there's no reality behind it somewhere? Or if you don't know what reality is. And that's where skepticism breaks down, I think. It just, there is no grounding to it. It's just a complete, it's all negative. It's all, that could be false, that could be wrong, and they don't have to justify it. Skepticism doesn't have to justify any of its skeptical claims. All it has to do is make them, and that's very easy to do. But if you look at it, there is something underneath skepticism. There is I hesitate to use the word, but there is a true reality underneath the skeptical claim. There always is. There must be. And I don't. When I say true, I don't mean. I'm not saying that I'm not making a metaphysical claim. I'm just saying that there's some layer in your life which you take to be fundamental, foundational, which you take to be true. And that level is perception. So those are the two arguments. Essentially, Merleau-Ponty says skepticism gives up on the problem of the world because it begins by presupposing that the being of the world is something external and external to and independent of the subject, who can then grasp this self-contained external reality in representations, either correctly or incorrectly, or more or less true. And this is precisely, though, what Merleau-Ponty is trying to investigate. He's trying to investigate this appearing accurately or this appearing inaccurately. But he's interested in this appearing. What is the being of that appearing? Yes, the world can appear in perception, which is coherent, organized, true, but it can also appear in a dream where it's not true, where it's an illusion. It can also appear in hallucinations. It can also appear in imagination. But all of those things appear, and that's what Merleau-Ponty is trying to investigate, the being of those appearances, the being of those phenomena. What he says this, what world being, thing being, imaginary being, and conscious being are. That's what Merleau-Ponty is interested in. How is it that anything is? And that's his project of ontology. He's going beyond the duality of at the base of skepticism, that there's the real world and the illusory world. He's going beyond that to see what is it that lets there be a real world and an illusory world. He's trying to understand that, and that's where the whole book is going, towards this deeper ontological structure. Nice. That brings us to the second section, which is to the things for me. So to the things for me, the world and the things I see, they're not just these sterile, neutral stuff, right? When I see things, they have meaning for me. They have significance. I'm interested in them. I'm engaged with them. So the world appears, but the world appears as mine, as for me. And this gives way to a paradox. How can the world be both what it is and at the same time be for me? And Merleau-Ponty says we would understand this situation very poorly if we were to see it as a subjective overlaying onto an objective reality. And that's the way that we often do think about it, right? We imagine the world is out there, objective, independent of us, and meaning, value, those are all things that we add on top of it. We superimpose onto this in itself of the world. That's not at all what Merleau-Ponty is interested in. And he has this really interesting way of expressing this. He talks about a metamorphosis as opposed to a synthesis. And he does this through binocular perception. So if you imagine through the analogy of binocular perception. So what is binocular perception? He says it's not two monocular perceptions synthesized. Right? When you your vision is binocular, right, through two eyes, but it's not a simple amalgamation or synthesizing of two separate monocular images. The binocular image that you see is an image of a completely different kind. It's not related to it's not simply related to the two monocular images. I mean, I can't even say it. You can't. The binocular doesn't arise out of an amalgamation of two monocular images. It's just a completely different kind of thing, a different order, Merleau-Ponty says. Thus, to go from one to the other, to go from monocular vision to binocular vision, is not to synthesize the monocular. It's a metamorphosis. It's a complete change. Thus, in perception, we witness the miracle of a totality that surpasses what one thinks to be its conditions or its parts. And I love this. This is like, if you've read Bergson, or if you've watched any of my videos on him, this is like Bergson, 100%. This is Bergson's idea. I'm not saying that Merleau-Ponty got it from him, although he probably did. He did. There's a lot of Bergson in Merleau-Ponty, even though he never acknowledges it. But, and of course, Bergson's not the only one who talked about this either. But still, it's there. So, yeah, this idea that breaking the thing down into parts doesn't give you a deeper understanding of that original thing, because it's a completely different kind of thing. As Bergson would say, it's a difference in kind, not a difference in degree. So when you make that leap from the parts to the whole, you're going from completely different realms, different orders of being. And you can't understand the whole in relation, or by breaking it down, by analyzing it into parts. You can't understand the binocular image by trying to break it apart into separate monocular images. You lose the thing that you're trying to originally understand, the binocular image. And it's the same thing then with our perception of the world. So we're not, he says, synthesizing a world as it is in itself, objective, independent of us, and a world which is for me, the meanings, the significances that I overlay on top of it. We're not synthesizing them. There is no synthesis of two separate things going on here. Rather, the world of perception is affected by a more holistic, and this is Merleau-Ponty's expression, awakening to the world. We are just thrust into it, and that's Heidegger. We are engaged with it in such a way that there is no conflict between a world out there and the world, between perceiving the world directly and perceiving the world for me. There's no conflict between the two. That when you step back and think about it and look at it as what it is, as this whole, this totality, there's no problem. But when you try and break it down, then paradoxes arise. And the error is not in the original belief that there is a world out there and that world is for me. The error is not in there. The error is in trying to understand it by breaking it into parts. When you do that, you lose that original totality. And that's what we don't want to do. So, that's the second part, to the things for me. And that brings us to the third part, which is to the things for others. Okay, so I see the world. I don't represent it. The world is for me the world as it is for me in this totality, which doesn't make sense when it's broken apart. But the world is also a world for other people. This world that I have this direct access to, that is for me, is also somehow for other people. And that's the paradox here. How can the world be for me and also for others? Now, Merleau-Ponty says, he starts this section by noting that even though we have this paradox, it's manifestly the case that the world is both for me and for others. There is this, we do experience our world and the world as it is for others. There is this communication between these two different worlds. I will never understand the world as it is through your eyes, as you perceive it, and you'll never understand the world as it is for me, but there is nevertheless this communication between us. It's nevertheless true that there is a world for me, and that world is somehow also for you. And we're both partaking in the same world. And the way Merleau-Ponty expresses this is by talking about music. He says, through music, I can enter into another's musical emotion. I can grasp how they perceive this music, through their expressions, through what they say about it, I can come to some kind of understanding. I can never perceive directly the way that they do, but I can nevertheless share in that. So there is some commonality, there is communication. He also says the green of the grass. I can catch sight of the green as it is for another person who's looking at it, obliquely, indirectly. But it's clear that it is, even as it is this thing for me, it's this thing for someone else as well. So that is a fact. That is something that we know for sure. We live it. Watsuji Tetsuro, or actually the Japanese philosopher, I made a video on his book Ethics. He talks about this in a little bit of depth as well, and the way that we're not isolated, atomistic individuals. We cohabit a world with other people. But anyway, that's just a little tangent. So we know that this is true, but that doesn't dissolve the paradox. We still can't understand it. It's true that these private worlds communicate, but yeah, how can we explain it? And this is where Merleau-Ponty talks about the unjustifiable certitude of the world. And he says here that as certain as all of this is when we live it, it devolves into contradictions as soon as we try to think it. The certitude of the world and things, entirely irresistible as it may be, remains absolutely obscure. We can live it, we can neither think it nor formulate it, nor set it up in theses. Every attempt at elucidation brings us back to the dilemmas. So this is an important theme, the idea that there's our lived experience is certain as anything can possibly be. Right? Our perception, the world, the things that we experience, and the fact that I experience the world directly, the fact that the world that I experience is for me, and the fact that that same world is also at the same time somehow for others. These things are undeniably true. They're as true as anything can possibly be. And yet, that's the lived experience. And then there's the other part where we try and think about it, where we try and break it apart, where we try and understand it. When we do that, then we end up in dilemmas. And that's really just that same idea that we talked about before, the whole versus the parts. The idea of a metamorphosis versus the idea of a synthesis. It's the same idea. We're irresistible. That certitude of the world and the things that we're talking about here is irresistible, but inexplicable. As soon as we try and break it down, as soon as we try and formulate it, set it up in theses, then we run into problems. And this certitude that we have, this is our original attitude towards the sensible world. It's unjustifiable, but this is only because to try and justify it is to go about it in the wrong way, is to interrogate this unjustifiable certitude with the wrong tool. In actual fact, we shouldn't even feel the need to justify it. As soon as we feel the need to justify it, we've entered into this picture where the world is something separate from me. It's different from me. And I'm this detached spectator, the Cartesian picture. And as soon as we do that, well, we're presupposing something already then, aren't we? We're presupposing that this is the structure of reality. And then we try and understand that structure. But if that structure is wrong, if that structure that we are presupposing is wrong, everything that follows will be wrong. And that's essentially what Merleau-Ponty is saying here, is that this is the way it is, and it is as certain as anything could possibly be. And in order for you to even doubt it, it must be the case that this world is lived the way that we live it. And he goes on to say that, in fact, the sensible world is the ground of anything concerning mind and truth. And we have it backwards, therefore, when we're looking for a proof, when we use the mind and its tools, when we use reason and try and break things down into parts, that approach has it wrong, because the sensible world is older than the world of thought. The world of thought, the logic, the concepts that we use, that's all grounded in the world. And if you start with that, if you start with the world, then you have a chance of explaining it. You have a chance of describing it and understanding it. But if you start with the split picture, that the world is something different, I'm over here, now we've got to explain this, then you find yourself in dilemmas, contradictions. So it's just a different way of, it's a reorientation of the way that we think about ourselves in the world. But the thing is, it's not a reorientation, actually. He's just telling us to trust the experiences that we have, to believe in the way that things are. Things appear the way that they do, and that's what needs explaining. We don't need to then make a presupposition that this is not the way things are. Things are actually different, and this is what we need to explain. Why make that extra step? This is the way the world appears to us. It appears as if I'm directly accessing the world. It doesn't appear as if I'm making a copy of it. It appears for me, but it also appears for others. This is the world that needs explaining. This is the appearance. This is the phenomenon that needs explaining. What we don't want to do, what Merleau-Ponty doesn't do, is impose a metaphysical presupposition on this, that the world is this independent reality. We are these detached spectators, and then try and explain that picture. So yeah, like I say, starting from the phenomenon, starting from the world as it is given to us. That's what Merleau-Ponty wants to explain. And the sensible world then is the visible. It's visible and it's continuous. The world of thought, on the other hand, is invisible and full of gaps. And so I just wanted to bring that in, mention that in the video, because that's the first time he mentions the visible and the invisible, and we'll talk about that. It'll crop up in many different places. Every time it does, I'm going to try and bring it to your awareness, but that's the first one. The sensible world is the visible one. It's continuous, it's coherent, it's organized. The world of thought, on the other hand, is invisible and it's full of gaps. It's piecemeal. It breaks things apart and tries to understand them via relations, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not that it's bad, it's just that the world of thought depends on the sensible world. It's not the other way around. And that's how we treat it, though. That's how Cartesianism treats it. We start with the world of thought and then try and explain the world as it's given to us. Merleau-Ponty is just reversing it, which ironically, as I said, is not really a reversal, because the reversal, it is a reversal, I guess. It's a reversal, but it's a reversal back to the original, back to the way things are actually given to us. So Merleau-Ponty says it's by borrowing from the world structure that the universe of truth and of thought is constructed for us. And I quite like this. We speak before we learn that thought is our reality. We use language long before we understand linguistics. And that really reminds me, sorry to do it, but it just reminds me of another Bergsonian thing. He says we're acting beings before we are thinking beings. Same kind of thing. We are in this world. We are engaged. We grasp the world before we think about it. That's where Merleau-Ponty wants to start, with that grasping the phenomenon. And I think I say the same thing. The visible is undeniable, it's certain. It's only when we retreat to the invisible that doubts emerge. And this is the important insight, and it's something I said before. Our power to reach the things themselves and our power to retreat to phantasms are in fact two sides of the same coin. And it's that coin that Merleau-Ponty's trying to explain, not either of the sides. So we talked about that in relation to skepticism, the way that there's the world as it appears in perception and the world as it appears through a skeptical lens, as illusory. Merleau-Ponty's trying to understand both. He's trying to understand the source of both. Those are like two sides of the same coin. Merleau-Ponty's looking at the coin. And normally we manage all of these contradictions and paradoxes without any trouble when we live. It's only when we try to form these explicit propositions and dissect things apart that we run into problems. If we should take a cue from the ease with which we live our lives. That tells us something important from Merleau-Ponty. Okay, so I'm going to finish up here and we'll have a quick look at a summary. So first up, to the things themselves. The main idea here, these are not then the world as we grasp it, the things that we see in it. They're not representations. We're not creating a model. The problem that confronted us here was that of skepticism. The idea that how do we know that the world is really the way it appears? And we looked at this through dreams or hallucinations. And the ultimate problem for skepticism is that it presupposes world as an independent reality. It presupposes this break between a subject and an object, when in fact Merleau-Ponty is just trying to understand the two together. He's trying to understand the being that allows there to be this skeptical claim that this world as an illusion. And that being will be the same as the being that allows there to be the world as perception. We're going from phenomenology to being itself, to ontology. The second section was to the things for me. And here the idea is that we're not a subjective overlaying onto an objective world. This is a bad way to understand what it means for things to be for me. And the problem then was, how can the world both be itself, directly accessible to me, and also for me? And Merleau-Ponty addressed this with the idea of a totality and parts, and the idea that we're not synthesizing two things. Rather than a synthesis, it's a metamorphosis that is required. When we go from one order of being to another order, that's a metamorphosis. It can't be achieved through a synthesis of parts. So, and we grasp the fact that the world is as it is and is at the same time for me, naturally and effortlessly and easily, until we break it into parts, until we divide it and then try and piece them back together, and we find it doesn't work. But when we live our lives, we have this truth, we grasp this truth easily, effortlessly. The third section, to the things for others. So we have now other people also have the world. The world also appears for them. But these private worlds, they do communicate. We don't feel like we're isolated in separate domains from anyone around us. We feel that we inhabit the same world. We cohabit it with others. And despite this apparent felt certainty, the problem arises: how can the world both be for me and at the same time for others? And this is where Merleau-Ponty talks about the unjustifiable certitude of the world. We can't justify it, but we shouldn't have to. What we only find the need to justify it when we interrupt our lived experience, when we interrupt that certainty that we have, that we cohabit, we share the world with other people. When we interrupt that, then we run into this problem. It's unjustifiable, but we don't need to justify it. This certitude is our original attitude, Merleau-Ponty says. And further, the sensible world, the visible, is prior to our thoughts, which are the invisible. That the world of reality is prior to the world of thinking. And the latter is based on and grounded in the former. And that's where we should, therefore, the former is where we should be looking. And that's where Merleau-Ponty starts. And so there's a real distinction here between lived versus thought. When we live our experience, everything is seamless. But as soon as we try and think it, we break it up into propositions, into concepts, into logic, then we get tangled up in irresolvable contradictions. And Merleau-Ponty's just saying, don't make that. Don't take that extra step. We don't need to break it up. We have the whole already in our grasp. Let's investigate that. And that's us for the first video. Cool. So I'm kind of looking forward to this. I'm kind of excited about this project. I'm glad I waited. I think I would have rushed through it otherwise and just to get it out of the way. But having waited and done some other stuff in between, I'm kind of excited about this series. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.